Hello, this is Steph Houghton, the Irritated American. And what I'm irritated about today, and irritated is putting it mildly, is the ongoing situation in the Ukraine, which I haven't discussed with y'all since right after the beginning of the war. And what sort of has me riled up is an article I read in today's New York Times, where it was saying that we were sending 30 M1 tanks to the Ukrainians. Now, as I pointed out in my previous video, the United States has 3,000 tanks that we are M1 tanks that we are not using, that are sitting in reserve. And it boggles the mind that we aren't sending not 30, but 1,000 of those tanks. Because, the fact of the matter is that with 1,000 tanks, let's just do some quick math here. A tank company is about 18 tanks, 4 tanks per platoon, 4 platoons per company, plus the XO and the commander both have a tank. That's 18. You probably want 1 or 2 so that, when one breaks down, you can trade out and you can replace combat casualties. So let's call 20 tanks a company. Then that means 80 tanks is a battalion. That's 4 companies, and 320 is a brigade. Though you wouldn't probably want all 4 tank battalions in a single brigade. But okay, but 320 is a brigade. So with 1,000 tanks, that would be 960, 3 brigades, and then you'd have a few spares. And if you then set that up right, that's enough tank battalions, 12, to form 3 mechanized divisions. Now, given the performance of the Russian army thus far, 3 fresh mechanized divisions would smash the Russian army like, a rotten pumpkin with a mace, and then this war would be over. And it's just not acceptable for us to be stretching this war out longer than it has to go on. Now, some people will say, oh, well, we could just make peace. Yes, well, that's true. We could. You can always, you can always decide that the way to deal with bank robbers is just to give them the money. But, it's not, if you don't want more bank robberies, that's not a very wise policy to pursue. So the question is, and I brought this up not in as much detail, but I mentioned it in passing, the fact that we have 3,000 tanks and 1,000 of them to Ukraine would make a huge difference. I pointed this out on like the 3rd day of the war. And still, here we are, almost a year later, digging around, talking about 30 M1 tanks. What? Excuse me? Come on. If we had started back then, now I admit that, in the first days of the war, no one knew how well the Ukrainians were going to do. But by June, it was absolutely clear. And at that point, we should have been like, great, we're getting them the 1,000 M1 tanks and, as many surplus M2 IFVs and the Stryker armored vehicles, some of which I think are now in reserve. This should all have by now, the equipment should all have been, refurbished, shipped to the Ukraine. The Ukrainians should have been training on it. And, now obviously they're having trouble with the weather. It's been abnormally warm, so mud season hasn't really come to an end. But in any event, so that when mobile warfare can resume, they would have 3 mechanized divisions of U.S. equipment with troops, that were well trained and, supported also obviously with the artillery, but we've sent them artillery. But the point is, there's just no purpose to fooling around, dragging this whole process out. The war needs to be brought to a quick and speedy conclusion because you know what? The U.S.'s publics, they're only going to be willing to support this for so long. It has to get put over with. Some people will say this is going to be a provocation, but Vladimir Putin is going to think anything that we do that makes his winning less likely is a provocation. But the fact is that he has flagrantly violated both the Kellogg-Briand Pact and the Charter of the United Nations. And there's no reason for us to think that, if he wins in Ukraine, that he won't do it again. And the next time, probably with a NATO ally, who we will then have to send not just equipment, but our own troops into direct combat with Russia. That really could provoke a nuclear war. So, it's time to stop this before it spins out of control. And the way to do that is to properly arm the Ukrainians, and obviously telling them that if they get more than 10 miles inside the pre-2014 Russian borders, that then we're going to cut off supplies so that, they don't go crazy, which who could blame them if they did. But in any event, so that they don't. The fact of the matter is, it is both silly from a military point of view and immoral from the point of view of, dragging the war out and increasing casualties for us not to equip the Ukrainians properly. So we just need to do it. I don't know what's holding them up. This isn't a partisan issue. I'm kind of irritated at Joe Biden about it, but I'm also irritated there are members of Congress who are Republicans who have, started to act like this is somehow a bad idea, stopping Putin from taking over his neighbors. But it just needs to be done. And we need to stop pussyfooting around with 30 tanks. A company and a half. Oh, that's going to have a huge effect on the battlefield. It'll have some, but do we want this war to be over or don't we? And the people who say we need to drag it out longer, I'm sorry. The Ukrainian civilian population and their army do not deserve this. And frankly, the Russian conscripts don't deserve it either. The sooner this war is over, the sooner people on both sides are going to stop dying. So it's time for us to just get our foot out and really give the Ukrainians what they need. So that's what has me more than irritated, a little bit rip shit today. So have a nice day. God bless you all. Bye.